It's been a long while since I've been with you, and it's a pleasure to be back. Always, always lovely to talk with you all, meditate with you, sort of see what's going on. And yes, we have made a commitment to October. That was I was on my way there when the pandemic closed us down. So it's an unkept promise that I'm going to be glad to keep now. Okay, so I think I want to talk a little bit about, about everything. So let me sort of find a spot for it. And then we'll do question and answer session afterwards. So I was looking in the Bible to see in what context Jesus made that remark, asked that question of Peter, who do people say that I am? It was toward the end of the life of Jesus. And in that section of the Bible, it also says that he was preparing his disciples for his departure. He wanted them to know that he was going to be leaving before too long and that many great challenges would come to them. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. I tend to sneeze as just a statement of my existence. I do it periodically. Usually 4 or 5 times in a row. So give me a second to make sure I'm not going to do that. Christ knew that things were going to get very difficult for the disciples, and he wanted to make sure that they were forewarned and could strengthen themselves against it. And also he wanted to give them, he wanted to finish as much as he was able to finish, explaining to them the nature of his teachings and what the spiritual path was really all about. Swamiji talked about it at the end of Master's life. Master began to sort of try to close the remaining gaps in people's understanding. And he also made the teaching very challenging at the end of his life. It's a sort of an odd thing to think about. You would think he would, sort of want to be especially nice. But Master Swami said that Master knew that there were some disciples who had the strength to stay on the path as long as Master was there personally to guide them through it, but that after he left, it would be a different kind of challenge. And Master wanted to make sure that there was a core group of disciples that had a clear shared understanding so that together they could move the work forward. If you think of it just in a practical way, if your core group of people all have different ideas about what they're supposed to be doing, and you don't have the clarifying energy of the Master there to bridge the gaps between them, you could see how the whole work could just disintegrate. So Master was very challenging at the end of his life, and many people, Swami said, began to leave during that period of time. That was just the time when Swami arrived, interestingly. But even the close disciples, there's one little hint at it. Sometimes when people write about a great saint or a great master, there are things that they want to say, but they don't want to draw too pronounced a focus on it, so they just hint at it. Swami talks about Sister Shraddha, and Swami talks about how Sister Shraddha was in the hallway outside of Master's room, and she had tears running down her face. And she said in frustration, I just can't seem to please him. Whatever I do, I can't seem to please him. And Swami was saying because Master was making it very hard at the end. He wanted people to have the inner strength to be able to just stay with it. Interestingly, in the Gospels, this incident of Jesus saying, who do people say that I am? And Peter saying, thou art the Christ, thou art the living God. It was after that Jesus went to the Mount of Transfiguration, or so it appears. Of course, you can't really tell for sure because the Gospels are not always as clearly chronological and they contradict each other. But it was all during that same period of time that this happened. So it seems, when I'm reading in the gospel. Some part of me doubts that. And I didn't study it completely, but that's what I understood. And he showed his true form to Peter and to John at that point, which was, of course, very powerful. So what I was thinking, just putting all that in order. So part of what is going on in the gospel at this time is that the Jews are an oppressed people. They're under the yoke of the Romans have them under their control. The Jews are allowed to carry on pretty much as they want to. And bear in mind that everything that happened in the life of Jesus was in the context of the Jewish faith. Later on, the Jews and the Christians became two realities, but that never happened during Jesus's life at all. And the conflict was within the Jewish community between different phases of Judaism. And what is really understood is that it was the Essenes that Jesus was part of, and they were the mystical branch. They were the branch that was holding on to Sanatan Dharma. And then there were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were, and the only words for it is, they were a corrupt priesthood. And they were money-oriented and power-oriented. And they had corrupted their own faith. And that's what Jesus was railing against, is that they had corrupted their own faith. So the Jewish people as a whole, though, were waiting for this Messiah to come, and the Messiah was going to be their savior. But many of them thought of that Messiah as coming in some kind of an external political context, because externally and politically, they were an oppressed people. That's why in the end, when they wanted to crucify Jesus, which was not such a great thing to want, but when they wanted to actually have real control over their destiny, they considered Jesus to be blasphemous. He hadn't committed any secular crime. He had committed a religious crime. And even though they were supposed to have control over their own religion, they didn't. So they had to go to the Roman authorities to be able to enforce their religious law. And when you study it, that's what you realize is going on. That's why Pontius said, I don't find any problem with him. You know, why do you want to crucify him? I can't see that he's done anything wrong. And yet they still demanded that he be crucified because he'd broken the religious law. So their very idea of the Messiah was that he was some kind of a worldly king. And so what also Jesus was trying to prepare them for was, even if they thought he was the Messiah, it wasn't going to come out the way they thought it was going to come out. And many of them, even though they were sincere in their spiritual aspirations, also had worldly ambitions. They thought they were going to be powerful. They thought they were going to be important. They thought that the secular power would pass into their hands because Jesus would lead them in that way. So, of course, what happened instead, and what happened not very long after this whole thing, I mean, the whole ministry of Jesus was just 3.5 years. So everything followed on itself pretty quickly, but this was more toward the end of his life. What happened was, instead of that Messiah declaring himself and taking secular power and becoming the king that they thought he was going to be, Jesus was crucified and he died. And then, yes, he was resurrected, but even his resurrection did not reestablish the secular power that many of his disciples thought was going to come. So there was, a tumultuous turning upside down, because bear in mind, here's Peter giving the right answer and Jesus saying, you're a rock and I'm going to build a church on this rock. Master said what he meant was the church of self-realization, not the church of the Catholic Church, not secular, not worldly, not external, but internal. That's what Master meant. You have intuition, therefore we can build spiritually. It was after that, on that terrible night when Jesus was arrested and ultimately condemned to death, that 3 times Peter said he didn't even know it. That was the great sort of story of Peter, because at the Last Supper, Jesus starts telling the disciples that he's going somewhere that they can't go. And Peter says, "Oh, that can't possibly be true, Lord. Wherever you go, I'll go with you. Absolutely, I will." Peter was a very colorful character. And Jesus says to Peter, "Really?" He said, "Before dawn comes, before the rooster announces the rising of the sun, 3 times you're going to say you don't even know me." And Peter's just horrified. All the other disciples are shocked. But then 3 times, in the terror of Jesus being captured and taken away and tortured and humiliated and eventually condemned, Peter panics. That's all that happens. Peter absolutely panics. And people say, "Aren't you one of his? Because what's going to happen next? I'll be taken, I'll be humiliated, I'll be crucified." No, Peter says, "I never even knew him." Far from being a disciple, I never met the man. Okay. Now, all of this goes on among the apostles of Jesus when he's still living, when they're right there with him. And here's where I'm going with all of this. And I'm going to jump into our present reality, into what all of us are facing. We're not apostles of Jesus living with him. We may be apostles of Jesus, but we're not living with him right now. There's always this extraordinary balance that we're trying to figure out as devotees as to how to be 100% dedicated to God and still live in some sensible way in this world. And also to deal with the fact that as it says in the Bible, the Lord says to us, "My ways are not thy ways," which is, I have an idea of what it would look like if God were active in my life and he were listening to my prayers. And God has an idea of what it looks like when he listens to our prayers. And we are living in such an unusual time, both in the exact present moment and also in a general way with Master's teachings, because we've chosen to incarnate at a transition point between the yugas. And I say, in a certain sense, fortunately, this is an advancing age, but I don't know whether it's better or worse. In a declining age, you just know that everything's going, well, I guess the phrase "to hell in a handbasket" is probably a very good one, where it's just going to get worse and worse. And so you don't have any expectation that this world is ever going to meet sort of the ideals that we have in our head. But this whole confusion between what the world appears to be to our human senses and our egoic preferences and what it is in terms of God's actual understanding of what we need. And I've certainly found it in my life over many years, just a never-ending source of challenge and confusion. And it comforts me that Peter is the rock upon whom Jesus is going to build his church, and then can get so panic-stricken when things go wrong that he can't stand by anything that he knows. He's seen Jesus transfigured on Mount Hermon, or whatever mount it was. He's seen Jesus turn into light. He's seen Jesus stand between Moses and Elijah. And yet, when it starts going in a direction that is not what his his preconceptions are, he panics. Of course, he recovered, and there's a wonderful balancing part. When Jesus appeared on the Sea of Galilee, and Peter, among others, was there, and 3 times Jesus says to Peter, the same number 3, "Do you love me?" And 3 times Peter gets to say, "Yes, Lord, I love you." But by the third time, he's a little irritated. Why do you keep asking me? I've already answered you. But 3 times no, and 3 times yes. And then, of course, Peter goes on to be a great disciple and ends up being crucified, just as he was afraid of. Ends up having his life taken away from him in a most challenging manner. So whatever Jesus said about what a great disciple Peter was, his actual experience in the world was not victorious in the world. So going back again to the present time, because I'm running these next to each other, in the autobiography of a yogi, there's a paragraph in the chapter about Babaji, in which we have this story of Jesus and Babaji conferring. And every time we do the Festival of Light, we have the paragraph, Jesus appeared to the great Master Babaji. The lights on the high altar of my church have been growing dim, though still lit on lower altars of good works. The noble taper of inner communion with the Lord burns low and is ill-attended. Let us together, united in Christ's love, set lights ablaze on that high altar again. Apparently Babaji said yes, because the next paragraph says, thus a new ray of light was sent to earth through the great masters of this path. Then in Autobiography of a Yogi, it says, same story, Jesus, high in the Himalayas, Jesus appears to Babaji, and Jesus and Babaji together have planned the spiritual salvation of this age. I've gone back to that paragraph over and over again, not just in the recent crisis, but just over and over again. And I just keep reading it again. Jesus and Babaji are working together, and this is how they put it, to inspire nations. It doesn't say to compel them. It doesn't say to force them. It doesn't say to impose on the world the light of God. It doesn't say anything like that. It says to inspire nations, to give up suicidal war, racial hatred, religious sectarianism, and excessive materialism. I'm not quoting it exactly, but those are the words that are written there. And the salvation of this age is direct inner communion with God. Because only when we feel the presence of God within us, this is how spiritual progress really happens, are we able to perceive the presence of God in others and all around us. And Master spoke at great length of this confrontation between light and shadow. And he promised us that light would prevail, but not immediately and not easily. And that in the process of light prevailing, there will be chaos on this planet. Cataclysm is the word he used, universal suffering. And okay, here we are. It's crazy making, because we have this human idea that things are supposed to work out nicely on this plane of consciousness, because I'm such a good and such a sincere person. Swamiji would make fun a lot of times. He would tease about attitudes that we were inclined to have to express seriously at other times. And when there was nothing at stake, he would make light of it so that you would remember it later. And I remember in the very early years, like in the early 70s, before Crystal Hermitage was built, if you look carefully at the construction of Crystal Hermitage from certain angles, you see that there's this dome, this completely still intact dome, and there's basically a carport built over it. And that's the reason that's done. It's done that way is because that dome leaked like a sieve. Water just poured into that dome, and they tried for years, like a decade, all different methods of trying to keep that thing from leaking, none of which worked. Swami always told them from the start, just build a roof over it. And they never really did until they remodeled the whole place. And then they just made a consistent roof line and just built it right over. The dome is parked under it like a car. And it worked perfectly. Now, during the time that it wasn't working, when it was just the Crystal Hermitage Dome, even before the downstairs area was built, Swami had this huge trap door, which was just in the middle of the living room floor. It was this huge trap door. You lifted it up. Things were very simple then. You walked down some stairs. You were just completely under the house and just bare dirt. He kept firewood under there. So you would lift it up and you would walk down and you would bring the firewood up and keep the fire going. That dome leaked so badly at certain times, and it used to rain like 60 inches in 6 months, which is a lot of rain. And it just poured into the house. I don't know how else to describe it. On occasion, we would lift that trapdoor and literally sweep the water out because it would just accumulate to such an extent. That was in the worst periods of doing that. And every effort was being made. And Swami at one point, I remember him just sort of putting on this whole dramatic thing. He said, "Why doesn't God answer my prayers? I'm so sincere," like this, you know. We're so sincere. We're trying so hard. Why doesn't he keep the water out of this dome? You know? And he, in jest, but he made God's failure to answer his prayer a question of his own worthiness as a disciple, you know, of the reality of God's love for him, all of which was preposterous in that context. But when it is about us and it's about something that matters to us a lot, life or death, health or well-being, financial catastrophe, abandonment by people we love, or world conditions going absolutely crazy for no reason at all. And we still hold this thought that I know best. But do we? And what makes us think so? And you have here, Babaji and Jesus are trying to inspire nations. But human beings have free will. And here's another odd thing. Evil people are just as much loved by divine mother as good people. And evil people who have developed enough of personal magnetism to be able to exert egoic power, Divine Mother doesn't stop loving them just because they're evil. She will teach them. And you can depend on the fact that their evil will bear its karmic consequences, but in Divine Mother's own time. And in the meantime, everything conspires to teach us on ever deeper levels. To answer that question, when Jesus says, "Who am I?" Oh, you're the one who answers my prayers and gives me what I want. That's who you are. You're the one who makes things go in such a way that I don't have to be scared out of my wits by what's going on the planet. You're the one who makes all the good people happy and all the bad people punished, according to my way of thinking how that should go. That's who you are. Really? Is that really true? Or is the power of God completely different than our own little egoic ideas? This is also in the Festival of Life. The second stage of the soul's long journey is to declare for myself what is true. And it says, and this the bird insisted upon it, even when repeatedly he lost everything he had. So there you have Divine Mother promising us that if our understanding is not correct, we're going to lose everything we have. So if loss begins to intrude upon us, or loss threatens, or loss descends, and all of us have had great losses in our lives. Is that because God doesn't love us and isn't really the Messiah Master isn't really the Messiah or the Avatar, however we call it? Or is it that I need to move from self-declared reality into a deeper, more humble uh, quest for true understanding? And this is the balancing act of human life. And Master said it's going to get worse before it gets better. And Master promises us that in the end, light will triumph. Now, look around at this planet. Light is increasing in every possible way that you can imagine. It's just becoming more and more and more and more. I've been on the spiritual path seriously with Ananda for 50 years. And 50 years is not long, really, compared to eternity. It doesn't even feel long in terms of my own life. But a lot of things happen in 50 years. You know, when I started, I had to make all of my own health foods. I had to make my own bread, make my own yogurt, make my own granola, make my own jam, everything that you could think of that you wanted to have in a healthy way, you couldn't buy it. Health food stores were very small, and they had no fresh foods, just packaged goods and vitamins, and very rare. It was a wholly different reality. I had to make it all myself. And periodically over the years, I would sort of revert back to that homemade, but I realized I could buy better products than I could make by that point. And now you can go into Safeway and they have this big organic sign in the Safeway. I mean, they don't have an excessive amount. But what was esoteric is now commonplace. Meditation, yoga, the concept of guru, just countless things. And good people doing really good work, not merely for God realization, but for societal change. But it's almost guaranteed that as light increases, then also the area put into shadow also increases. And we're here because we thought it would be a good idea to help Master usher in the new age. And we're here because Master thought it would be good for us to be here to help usher in a new age. So we have a real serious job to do, to be instruments of the light. There's no way that we do not have a divine assignment here. We have it. But how that divine assignment is going to play itself out, how much pain, how much fear, how much disappointment, how much freedom, I don't know. And every time I hear my heart dictating to the divine how things are supposed to be, I remember Jesus's prayer, because at the Garden of Gethsemane, before he was crucified, he said, "Lord, let this cup pass from me." Which it was an extremely important prayer. He had an opinion. He knew that something really awful was about to happen. Now, people think it was awful because he was afraid. He wasn't the least bit afraid. He wasn't the least bit concerned. He was capable of stepping out of his body whenever he wanted. I don't just mean in death, but just becoming indifferent to the body. Master showed that. Every avatar showed that they had that power. But Jesus had brought this great message, and it was going to be rejected, and those who rejected it were going to have to keep suffering. That was the tragedy that he saw, that he was there to alleviate people's suffering, and they preferred to suffer. And that broke his heart on a level that we can hardly even imagine, because the masters live inside of us. Every ounce of suffering and pain that we experience, he experienced with us. It broke his heart. Lord, let this cup pass from me. This is a terrible idea. I'm bringing this liberating teaching, and you're going to crucify me instead. I mean, have you really thought this through? Is this really a good idea? That was his prayer. But then the second part of it was, but thy will, not mine, be done. So it's like Jesus gave us the most authentic possible way to relate to the extraordinarily dualistic nature of this planet. And when this whole conflict in Ukraine started, and it seems obvious that Divine Mother is going to give power to an evil madman, this is not the first time in history, nor unfortunately will it likely be the last, when Divine Mother gives power to an evil madman. And you can be sure that he wouldn't have that power if Jesus and Babaji were not aware of the necessity for him to have it. Why they think it's a good idea is beyond me. I'm going to be in Jesus's prayer. Lord, are you sure this is what you want to do? But apparently, our spiritual freedom, our freedom, everybody's freedom, lies down this road. And part of the purpose of that road is for us to keep affirming the power of light. And this is where it gets very subtle. But thy will, not mine, be done. Self-evidently bless and take care of those people. I've come to a prayer that I came to when my parents were in the last years of their lives. And it's the one that I continually use, rather than telling God how to let me phrase it differently. I present the problem to God and let him figure out how he's going to solve it. Lord, whatever it is you're trying to teach these people, help us to learn it. And help us to learn it fast. Because otherwise this nightmare will have to go on. Help bring us to the light, Lord. Bring us to the light. Bring us to the light. Give all who are here to learn, the power to learn. And make us free. We don't really want to be comfortable. We want to be free. We want our comfort to come from our spiritual freedom. Because otherwise it's just a matter of time before it blows up on us again. And if we're in a situation where karma has to be faced, better to face it. Don't you think? Because otherwise it's just going to come around again. And everything has conspired to bring us till now. So, my friends, those are my thoughts for today. It's a bit of it's not all is joy, but it is all is joy, because that's where we're going, whatever the road looks like. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I know that thou art with me. And that's where real power comes from.
Thank you so much, Asha. I really appreciate that. And it does seem like, we are rocking and rolling these last few years, and that there's no room for complacency in the devotee's life. And I know for myself, I'm just so grateful for this spiritual family and for the inspiration that we receive from you and from so many of the other leaders in the Ananda worldwide. It's helped me personally stay as steady as possible and to just clarify things for me and what I need to do individually, as I contribute and go deeper. And so thank you. And so I think what we'll do now is we will open it up for folks to ask questions. And you can, of course, those that have been joining us all these last 2 years, that you can either put them in the chat or you can ask them directly. And we will go off of Facebook now. We'll invite our Facebook friends to join us through the Zoom portal, and that's on our website, AnandaDallas.org or AnandaTexas.org. That's something new we have. So anyway, you can join us there. And so I'll just see if anybody has any questions. Feel free. Let's go for it.
Good morning, Asha. Good morning, friends in Texas. This is Pam and Sam up in the central coast of California. In our studies of the yugas, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the transition between the ascending Kali and the ascending Dwapara. And during your talk, Asha, I got inspired to, or maybe it was an intuitive thing. Is there any indication in a timeline of when Babaji and Jesus met to declare that they're going to work to improve our world? All of a sudden, this intuitive thing said it had to have happened in the transitional period between Kali and Dwapara. You got anything to say about it?
Well, the fact that Lahiri Mahashaya incarnated and began the cycle in the 1800s um, would seem once the timing was determined, there would be no reason to wait. So that's sort of like the beginning of the descent here was when Lahiri Mahashaya incarnated, because that was the change that took place. I've never heard Swami say one way or another. An interesting thing Swami said, because there's a lot of statements about how many different major spiritual figures were either one of our avatars or closely related. Swami raised the question once that perhaps this line of masters is responsible for this planet. And how long have they been incarnating, and how long have they been looking out for us? Now, the other side of that, Sam, is like Jesus appeared to the great master Babaji like did he like have to travel? Did he have to appear there? It's like, are they not in constant, if they're in constant communion, where did they like just start being in constant communion? So you sort of wonder how much is just poetic license to try to put into some kind of a story that we can follow, something that happened on levels that would not make sense to the human brain. Nonetheless, we have seen a manifestation in time, which is in the early 1800s, when Lahiri brought Kriya. Lahiri incarnated first, and then, of course, he went back to Babaji, and that whole cycle started. But Swami, because the word Kriya simply means action, and many Indian teachers call what they teach Kriyas. Swamiji says, to be clear, we have to say the Kriya of Lahiri Mahashaya of Varanasi, India. We have to be that precise, and then we know what we're talking about, which again ties, because the capacity to direct our own spiritual destiny by the specific practice of Kriya or something like it, is the salvation of this age, because it returns to the individual the power over spiritual life, takes it back from institutions, dogmas, and priests, and because it is the method by which direct intercommunion can happen. So there has to be a very close relationship there. But there is one last point on the timeline, which is when you start understanding how the world is constructed, you have causal, astral, and material. And there are three levels. We have ourselves, we have all of those vibrations within us. And everything in the material plane begins on the causal level, which is to say with an idea. Energy is applied to that idea, and then there is a material manifestation. The example often uses, if you want to build a building, somebody has to think of the building, somebody has to draw the plans, somebody has to construct the building, and then the building is there. So because we're on the material plane, we tend to think of the material plane as being the big solid cause of things, but it isn't actually. So the energy has to move through all of those stages before it comes out on material form. Once again, when you start actually thinking about time, when you're talking about dimensions where time is not a factor, it gets a little confused, but still, here we are in the material plane where time is real. One of our attorneys asked me once, this is like a person who wasn't involved with our teaching, but ended up being closely involved with Ananda. He asked me the obvious question I'd never thought of, which is, can you incarnate backwards in time? Can you be in 2020 now, and then in 1700, and then in 25, and then back in 700? And Swami, I had to ask Swami because I'd never thought about it. He said, reincarnation takes place in the realm of time, and therefore it's governed by time, and that we reincarnate the material body sequentially, consistent with the progress of time. But outside of that, because when Swami talked about learning to meditate and going into a superconscious state in his early 20s, and he recognized that place, that state of consciousness, as the same place he used to enter from babyhood. That's how he would go to sleep. He would go into a superconscious state. And he didn't know that he thought that's what everybody did. But he said, not only did he recognize it as the same vibration, it was the same moment, because in superconsciousness, there is no time. So how about that for just mixing it all up in all kinds of ways? So
Well,
yes.
you did answer the other burning question I've had. There seems to be a marked interest in and around Ananda to be studying the holy science.
Yeah, I have seen that too. Uh-huh.
And we are now part of the Dallas group as we're going through a study of the holy science. And what you just said was the first 11 sutras
Okay.
in here. So thank you. This whole conversation is all tying together, and I think it's a wonderful conversation that is happening throughout the world, especially with the holy science and the yugas.
Well, the only way I found to have any peace of mind at this moment in history where we're standing is to be able to pull back and think, this is and it seemed like a good idea for us to incarnate. I suggested to Swamiji that the next time he comes, and therefore the next time we have to come with him, that we choose a higher age, because this is just a drag. This was many years ago. But of course, this is the time we're needed. So what can we say? Okay, other questions?
So we do have a question in the chat that I'll read. It says, Asha, you mentioned Yogananda said things would get worse before they get better, and that the light would ultimately prevail. Are those quotes from The Road Ahead?
It is from The Road Ahead. Somewhere on the internet, by the way, Swami's book, Letters of Divine Friendship, that big, thick book, I did a very long series of classes on it. There's a whole section in there called World Conditions. And in addition to The Road Ahead, Swami has a lot of information in that section of that book. So you can just read it out of there, just go to that section of the book. And I did a number of classes on it. And we pulled those classes out and called it something like Yogananda's Prophecies for the Road Ahead. And I think it's very helpful. Well, let me phrase it differently. It was very helpful for me to have to go over all of that and then fill it in as much as I could with the conversations with Swamiji and reflections I've had. Because otherwise, you see, this is what I was trying to address a little while ago, and I hope I did to some extent. We are always being confronted with things that we would rather not accept as God's will. It's just like every day something happens and we would rather it not be God's will. And especially when it's ugly and people suffer and good people seem to suffer. And, it's just like everything in us rebels against it. But any rebellion against what is, first of all, is doomed. And that doesn't mean, it's where we get confused. To accept that this is what is happening is not to passively just say, so therefore there's nothing I can do about it. But it's like we recognize what we're up against, and we have to put out energy that is in relation to what we're up against. And there's a real fine line between positive affirmation and wishful thinking. When we were deeply engaged in litigation with Self-Realization Fellowship, which went on for 12 years. It was 12 years of litigation. And I was in the middle of it the whole time. The lawyers were all lived, near where I live, and all of the meetings took place and blah, blah. So I was really in the middle of it. There were a lot of people who just did not want to have to be involved in what was going on with that Guru Bhais were suing us, and then later it went into character assassination, sexual discrimination lawsuits. It was pretty awful, and it went on for a really long time. And I watched different reactions to it, and one of them was, let me think how to say it, just a resistance to accepting that it was really happening, and a desire to affirm light and goodness rather than facing into conflict. Now, you start with that. So then I'll fast backward to 1998 was actually the time when the sexual discrimination lawsuit went to trial. We had 2 or 3 weeks of trial right here in the area where I live, and Swami was living in our house, and there were 10 or 12 of us that were staying in the community, and every morning we'd have breakfast together, and then we'd head off to the courtroom, and it was just ghastly. And every morning at breakfast, every day in the courtroom was just worse than the day before. The judge was biased. We had hired a lawyer who was completely incompetent and thought we were scum, and his defense of us was so transparent that I didn't even believe it. I mean, we had a good defense, but his defense was terrible. Everything he would say, I could immediately see why it was wrong. It was just awful. And as Swami said, the law of averages say that at least 1 or 2 things will go in your direction. He said, so when everything goes against you, it's the hand of God. That's how he put it. Because it's just not possible for everything to go wrong unless Divine Mother is orchestrating. However, every morning at breakfast, Swami would say, I think today is the day that everything's going to turn in our favor. And he would be very specific. I was watching juror number 7, and I think he's beginning to understand what's really going on here. He would make all these very specific comments. Everyone else at the table, including me, felt that somehow Swami had lost his mind, and it was up to us to tell him that, in fact, we didn't have a prayer, that everything was going against us. The juror number 7 hated us more than ever. And he would try to put out a little positive energy, and we would just dump cold water on him every morning. We did that every morning. He would be misguided, we thought. We would correct him. How could you possibly think this? The last day, it took me till the last day, it finally crossed my mind that Swami, he wasn't that stupid. He could tell what was going on. He was just trying to generate some positive magnetism into this situation. And we were just determined that not one molecule of positive energy would ever see the light of day. So that morning, I agreed with him. Everybody at the table thought I'd lost my mind now, but I agreed with him. And in that case, everything went against us. We had a terrible verdict against us, blah, blah. So later, much later, I'm talking to Swami about this. And I described that whole story. And he, of course, completely knew exactly what had been going on and completely agreed. And then I also talked to him about when we'd been struggling with SRF more directly, how many people did everything they could except the fact that we were being sued by these great souls, these lifelong disciples, who are still out trying to destroy us. That was what was happening. I said, Swamiji, so often what I would see is that people were afraid, and therefore they were creating a positive scenario, not out of positive energy, but out of fear of facing something they didn't want to have to face. And Swami said, ah, yes, he said, it's a razor's edge, isn't it? It's a razor's edge. And I said, often I would be negative just for the sake of trying to get people to be realistic. And he says, ah, yes, it's a razor's edge, isn't it? And he said to me, yes, he says, sometimes you're quite negative. And I never think of myself as negative. And he said, you're quite negative. And then this is how he put it, because you're so factual, just like that. You're so factual, just insisting on all the facts. And instead of then generating, now bear in mind, the material plane is the last place where people express. So the ideas we hold and the magnetic energy we put out also determines the result. So in being so factual, often I was not really being truthful because I was asserting that the facts were going to run it rather than the magnetism that we were putting out. And once again, Swami said, yes, it's a razor's edge, isn't it? You see? So it's, yeah, it's the spiritual path is not as, you can't just get these neat little dogmas. And so what we have to ask ourselves always is, am I afraid? What is the real force that's guiding me? And fear is the opposite of love. And perfect love casts out fear. If Divine Mother loves us perfectly, if I love Divine Mother with complete faith and affection, why am I afraid? Why am I afraid of anything that she sends me? Oh, I have lots of good reasons why I'm afraid. It's not like I don't know, but I've gradually learned what the real issue is. This came to me also very early with Swamiji when I was having trouble making a very important decision. It was very hard for me to know God's will. No, it's not, he said. I said, well, it's very hard for me. And it was very hard for me in that circumstance because I was terrified of what God was going to do to me. I was just as frightened as I could be. So instead of asking then, what does God want? What does God want? I started asking, why am I so afraid? And then the conversation got really interesting because there were lots of extremely interesting reasons why I was so afraid. None of them valid in the greater scheme of things. But all of a sudden, I was dealing with my authentic issues rather than just playing around with karma over here. This is what we do. My karma is just too hard. So I'm just going to pretend that this is my karma over here, because then this one is too tough. But if we don't open it to the divine, we can protect ourselves. If we're protecting ourselves and won't let it out, then God can't help us. That's why the prayer becomes, whatever it is you're trying to teach me, help me to learn it.
Thank you, Asha. That's beautiful. And I want to see if anybody else has a question for her before we return to the chat. Is anybody else want to ask a question directly? There is another question or two in the chat, but I thought
were you going to do Stephanie's question?
Well, I was going to see if somebody else wanted to ask one directly first.
Okay.
Anybody?
Well, I have a question, just to kind of follow up with what Asha Ji was saying. So Asha, when you are out in the world and everybody's tense, what is and we have our perspective and our understanding of what's unfolding in the world and how is the right sort of spiritual way to look at it. But what would be like the right way to respond or be when you're with others who are not on the path and they're expressing fear about things that are happening? So like if people are starting to talk about, worst case scenarios with what's unfolding over in Ukraine. And they're like, okay, Putin's going to do this and he's going to do this. And we got to, if you're in those situations, like how would you respond to that? Or do you not respond to it?
Oh, no. Well, not is often the answer, but there's a wonderful quote from St. Francis that I keep in a prominent place in my house. It says, preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. So the first part of it is to recognize that words are a very, very small part of communication. And what we say with words often, the words that we use, unless you're dealing with an extremely open-minded person who actually, to use a very strong phrase, gives a damn what you think and is the slightest bit interested in hearing another point of view, it's usually completely pointless to spend your energy on words. And I go back to, everything is very simple. The real dualities in the world are fear and love. And much of the time, whatever people's point of view is, however they've rationalized it out, you're still just dealing with the child of God who's going to need to draw closer to his divine mother or not. But much of the time you can't say anything like that because they don't care. I remember when someone was trying to help me overcome a habit of procrastination in a particular situation. And they tried to help me get over my procrastination by telling me about all the terrible things that were going to happen if I continued to delay my decisions on this matter. I was totally aware of the terrible potential, and it terrified me. And so to have somebody tell me more about all the awful things that were going to happen just made everything worse. I had the presence of mind to say, don't try to scare me. I'm already scared. Tell me that I'm wonderful and that I'm loved and it's going to be okay. Because that was the real duality there. And to their credit, they never tried to scare me again. They always just tried to comfort me. Everybody just wants to be comforted. That's why Jesus even called the comforter. So what I think when I'm with people who are talking like that, I pray, Divine Mother, what useful thing can I do here? And you can actually even pray to the superconscious element of the person you're talking to. And you pray not only for that person, but to them. What do you want from me? On a soul level, what could I give you that would actually move your life forward? And then you begin to know what it is that you should do, and most of the time, it's not to engage, or you can engage by turning it in a completely other way. Well, God help us if all of that comes down. We're all going to have to really cling to each other and help one another if that's what happens. You just go somewhere else with it without contradicting. Direct contradiction is almost always pointless. And it's just better. I make it a habit. I mean, it's such a deeply ingrained habit, I don't even think about it. Whenever I have an interaction with a stranger or just someone that it's not deep, I always try to think of something that will lift their spirits and make them happier. Oftentimes when you're in a store, for example, it's amazing how many store clerks have beautiful manicures. Just these wonderful wild fingernails or something. And I always comment. They have a beautiful tattoo. This morning, I saw this woman and she just made a piece of art out of her hair and plopped it on top of her head, and it was just like, you can always find something honest to say. I don't necessarily say that's beautiful. I just say, wow, look at that. That's like a piece of art that you planted on top of your head, and all of a sudden we're loving each other, we're people together, and we're happy. And everything follows from that. So don't worry so much about content. Worry about vibration is what I would say.
Asha, I have a question,
Okay.
and I put it in the chat, but I'll elaborate. I asked, how do we steady our nervous systems in this time? But even more specifically, in my case, the heart. We've heard that you don't practice Kriya. Well, I don't know. This is what I've internalized, that you want the heart to be able to withstand your practice of Kriya, is my words. But the heart, when they speak to us of opening the heart, it's also full of the emotions. So what do you know about Swami's ability to work with whatever the physical heart was experiencing in the deepest knowing that he had about
Mhm. Stephanie, when you say the heart to withstand the Kriya, are you talking physically? Or are you speaking on energetically?
it's mixed up in my mind. So thank you for that question.
I think the word withstand is not a very clear choice. So I think we should put that word on the side for a minute.
Okay.
Swamiji says that we think that restlessness in meditation is because the mind is restless. He said it isn't, it's because the heart is restless. Reason follows feeling. And so when the heart is afraid or agitated or preoccupied with something, it creates discomfort and restlessness in the mind. If we think about it, and also Master just made it as a rule, reason follows feeling. People develop a whole point of view because they have a feeling bias one way or another. Watch somebody who's really in love with someone, and they'll tell you the most preposterous things about that person, but it's so endearing because they just find everything about them charming, even if you don't find everything about them charming. Reason follows feeling, and someone becomes prejudiced on a certain issue and they find all the reasons in the world. Many Nazis who exterminated Jews were very highly educated, intelligent people, but they needed to have someone to hate or to be sadistic toward, and so they had all these reasons for it. It's quite, and you think that your obnoxious, overweight, unfortunate spouse is just the dearest, most beautiful being there is on the planet, just because you love them so much. But when the heart is afraid and is vibrating with an attitude of fear, then you really can't calm the mind down. And what makes let me just pull this together here. That's why we do so much on the path of Kriya Yoga with devotion, with music, with devotional practices, including music, is the understanding that if we can put the heart in the right vibration, then everything else will follow. And that's why Master said chanting is, quote, half the battle, whatever that actually means, because music bypasses a lot of the, whatever it is in the brain. That's why they're able to do these amazing things with music, and people who have Alzheimer's, people whose brains are broken can still remember and respond to music because we are vibration of sound. So when we put the right sound in, we shift the whole vibration, especially of the heart, and the right kind of music. This is why Swami wrote so much music, and Master wrote music, because music of the right kind did not exist, or there wasn't very much of it. So the music that brings us in tune with the practice of Kriya is part of the practice of Kriya. I mean, there's lots of different ways to cope with fears, but music is a really important one. I was going through, I don't remember what I was upset about at the time, but I was really upset about something. There was some situation that was causing me a lot of trouble. Can't remember now what it was. But my friend Karen Gamow, who's the music director here and has been my friend for decades, she told me to sing the song Little Kathy. Little Kathy went dancing, went dancing, went dancing. Little Kathy went dancing one day tra-la-la lira, oh, tra-la-la lay. You know, I was dealing with some existential crisis of magnificent proportions. And she's telling me to sing that stupid little children's song. It was summer months, and I ride my bicycle instead of using my car a lot in the summer. And sometimes I get on my bike and my mind would start running away from me. And I just one day said, oh, what the heck, I'll just sing that stupid song. So I started singing that song. I mean, I like it, but it's not, I started singing it, and I started singing it out loud. I could not be emotionally upset and sing that song at the same time. And the song, because it was, I couldn't take it seriously. It wasn't like John Anderson or, Love is a Magician, just, it wasn't a song like that. It was just this, but its vibration completely contradicted any negativity. And it wasn't really interesting. I mean, I knew that in theory before, but it was quite something. So pay attention. If, use the music. We have such an incredible, at Swami's songs, Master's chants, you don't have to be a good singer or musician. You can just hum them because they'll change your vibration. That's just one method. But yeah, it's not that we have to, well, strengthen is the right word, but we have to transmute all of the, and it's karma from lifetimes. It's not just what we can remember. It's all the traumas that we've ever had that have made us afraid. They're all there. If I love too much, I'll be hurt. If I risk too much, I will lose. If I depend too much, it will disappoint me. And the darn thing about all that is, you see, it's true. And this is where very few people actually follow the spiritual path, because we have to find our final security in our relationship with God and Divine Mother. And none of the rest of it will work. It may work for a while, but sooner or later it will disappoint us. And the perseverance and the courage that requires, it takes us a lot of lifetimes to build it up. But I become very practical. It's like, I'm really, really tired of suffering. I'm like super tired of suffering. But my friend Shivani said, don't even imagine that you're going to be able to overcome a weakness until you're absolutely disgusted with it. So you have to just work where you can. And I've become very tired of mental agitation. So I work harder than I used to work at. I used to just let it roll because, sooner or later it would go away. But I work harder at it now. It's just reached the karmic level. And so then God ups the ante. He sends an evil madman to invade a country. And complete craziness ensues. And on another level, just you have to know it's God's will, because no human beings are so stupid, but they're all being moved with this incredible stupidity. Divine Mother's just letting the karma roll. I don't know. It scares the bejesus out of us. And so we have to just take really seriously, what are we going to do about this? I'm not being very cheerful today, but
Well, we'll just start seeing little Kathy.
okay.
I have had that experience too with the music, and sometimes I just feel like Divine Mother, it's just another grace. I remember when my father was in the hospital, and when I think about it, I don't know why it even occurred to me, but I had to spend the night there, or I wanted to spend the night, but it was not a great situation. And it just occurred to me, listen to the oratorio. And so I listened, I had that plugged in all night long. And even when I finally managed to fall asleep, it was still playing. And it was just like, it was like this lifeline, and it was just the vibration of it. And then I think more recently, I've really felt how Om, just chanting Om mentally and also out loud, has just been extremely powerful. And it also feels like it's not only brings comfort to me, but it's like it's going out into the world. So those have been experiences that just I've had with music and chanting and whatnot. But we are so grateful that you're taking this time, and we wonder if you still have a few more minutes. Once we have you on, we don't want to let you go.
Not a problem. I'm happy to stay with you.
So there is, I think there was a couple of other. Oh, this is just a really quick one, which was just, can you repeat the title of Swami's book again that you mentioned earlier, and we'll put it in the chat even.
Letters of Divine Friendship. Is it called Divine Friendship? I think that's what it's called. That's the one. It's the collection of letters.
Okay. And I guess that was the only other comment was somebody. Kevin said Napoli is a great song too to sing.
Right. And another one I like is Mañana Friends.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. So how about anybody else have a question?
Well, I just want to say, speaking of the chat and speaking of
Oh.
the world situation now, we did put the link to Ananda Sisi's prayer session they're doing today. It's 2:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, so adjust that appropriately. And it's just a half an hour thing.
Yeah, it's just a half an hour.
Okay.
So yeah, and it'll be led by.
Ananda folk all over the world are putting good vibrations in, and those good vibrations will really affect. They'll affect the world. They'll also affect the aura that we have around ourselves, and we'll create. I use the phrase shadow and light all the time now, and you put forward light, and of course sometimes it also creates shadow. Also exists, but the more we can live in the light. Master says in more than one place, when he talks about these difficulties, those who love God will be protected. That's what he says. And I've read it as flatly as that. Now, I don't necessarily trust the editing, I have to say. But still, that it could be said anywhere. What does that mean? That we'll be protected. Well, does that mean that we won't be harmed? Does that mean that we'll find spiritual freedom from what comes to us, meaning that we won't be harmed, that we'll be helped? Master commented about how many people who died in concentration camps became saints from that experience. So then you ask yourself, if I could become a saint, would I accept it? Would I be eager? Would I go forward eagerly to have a very difficult experience because it would be the end of all suffering? I could become free. I love to ask questions that don't have obvious answers, and really put my fears, the things I fear, in a different perspective. And so all that Ananda is doing globally is very, very important and very positive for all of us to put our energy into. So yes, let's do that. For this hour were we born.
I want to toss in that Asha Nayaswami said something to me about 20 years ago. I'm sure she has no recollection of this. We didn't even know each other. I happened to be in Palo Alto and I was struggling with a question. And I went up to her, not planned, out in the courtyard, excuse me, that was my New Orleans accent coming out. And I said to her, so I'm struggling with this question, and I said the question, and I don't seem to be getting an answer. And she pondered my statement for about 2 seconds, and then said, try changing the question. And I have never forgot that, and I have used that. It has been a very wise thing for me to do, is if we're not getting an answer or hearing the answer we want to hear, right? Just change the question And then it really does seem to change, not only, it changes my hearing.
Yeah.
And that was, anyway, that was at least 20 years ago. So
That was pretty smart of me.
it
That
was very, yeah.
and it was good of you to remember. But you know, that's what Swami said to me. It's so hard for me to know what God wants. No, it's not. That was precisely what that led me to, which is, why am I not getting an answer then? Oh, it's the wrong question. You know, most of the time, almost all the time, when we don't get an answer. And people say, should I take the job in Arizona? Should I move to Baltimore? And the question is, how can I serve? It's not, should I move to Baltimore? Should I live in Arizona? But so this is actually true. Thank you. Thank you, Supriya. That's actually very helpful, because that is exactly the right answer. Because it isn't hard to know. But if it is hard, sometimes it takes a friend to find out. Much of the time, when I'm just talking to someone, trying to help them, I just tell them what they just told me. They just didn't hear it the same way that I heard it. It's like in other words, we have much more wisdom than we know, but we get scrambled. And all we have to do is just sort it out. That's why I changed the question. Figure out just where am I off? And then all of a sudden the door is open. Because, you know, Divine Mother actually wants us to know. She's really on our side. See, everything comes back to our essential relationship. I've been thinking a lot of God as Divine Mother recently, because things are so scary. I would rather be comforted than challenged. So, but if we really, really, really have faith in God and feel God as the comforter, then everything gets different. So every time I don't feel that, every time I get spun into something that makes me feel unsafe, I try to bring it back to the essential cause. You get the generic solution, and then you can apply it to every question, actually.
All right, so let's see if there's anybody else, and we'll pause for a moment. And you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just, I loved your thing about what Swami said about you're so factual. And we were watching a movie last night that called Belfast. That's about Kenneth Branagh as the director, and it's about Northern Ireland during the Troubles in the late '60s and the '70s. And there was this great, had a lot of humor in it, and there was this great one little quote where somebody said, No, I'm very much a great believer in facts as long as they don't interfere with my beliefs. And you laugh at it, but it really is kind of human nature. It's like, okay, well, I don't want to go there, so I'm going to ignore that fact, or I'm going to spin it to my liking. But I think that, you know, I can see what Swami was trying to do in the court case of, you know, trying to generate some positive magnetism that maybe might swing the court case, maybe not. But in the meantime, it's bringing something forth out of each of us that we need to bring forth. That's our purpose here. And so I'm not sure if I really have a question here. I also think of the story about Swami at Mount Washington when he was trying to figure out a way to build, as he'd been told by Master, to get new quarters for the monks so they weren't in the same building as the nuns, and he was trying to figure out how to do that, and there was no money, and so he decided to put some kind of energy into it and started doing like a small import-export business, and I think his comment was it would have taken me decades to make enough money, but then lo and behold, we had a huge donation come in, and they could build it. So I think I just love what you said about about Swami always trying to inject that positive energy and to create that magnetism.
There's another, just further on that, because I was energetic, and so he wasn't trying to just get me moving. And he warned me that you don't. What he warned me was, what creates good work is good magnetism. And if you let your magnetism get bad, if you begin to feel martyred about what you're doing, or put upon, or complain and nobody understands, your magnetism, even if your efforts are still okay, you will either not create any good, or you won't create much good if your magnetism isn't good. And so it's always, we're always thinking that way. And what you said exactly is true, that story about Swami. I have a concept I use, which is, even if I don't know how this is going to work out, I try to do the right thing. I sort of say, in a vacuum. I do Dharma in a vacuum. I don't know where it's going and how it's going to work, but in this little box that I'm in now, I can see something positive to do, so I'll do it. And I've watched it happen over and over again, that once you get positive energy going, positive energy attracts positive energy. That's that awful phrase in the Bible. To those who have, more shall be given, and to those who have not, even the little they have will be taken away from them, which is just like about as gruesome a statement. You don't want to ever read that one more than once. But it's really talking about the law of magnetism. If you get contractive, then you start losing everything. If you remain dynamic, then that dynamism begins to bring more. So yeah, sometimes we shouldn't be so factual. We should just say, well, all I can do is import and export harmoniums, I think is what he was doing. And eventually I'm going to build a monastery. And you could argue that one did not lead to the other, but you could also argue that one did lead to the other. And that we just keep it up, and eventually the tide will turn in our direction. It's very important. That's why people with good magnetism are so wonderful to be with. Whenever I look at something that we're trying to develop in Ananda, I always think, who is in the middle of it, who's having fun and can make it fun for everyone else? And if somebody is having enough fun to create really positive magnetism, then the whole thing will work. And even if you're working hard, if nobody's having any fun, it's not gonna bring what you want from it. So yeah, that's all very important, Mark. All of that. It's perfect.
That image always comes to my mind from that scene in It's a Wonderful Life, when everything is going wrong, and the money's been stolen and all that, and Jimmy Stewart comes with that basket and puts $1 bill, and somebody else puts another, and they dance around, and they say, we're gonna make babies. It's like, I always, that image always pops in my head about prosperity consciousness and just positive magnetism and stuff like that. So
yeah. It's a profound truth, but it's a razor's edge. This is where, between positive thinking and wishful thinking, all of it. But that's what we're here to learn. I mean, Swamiji said to me, this is in Light Bear. Swamiji said to me, people think that I'm impractical because I say we're going to have 200 people for Spiritual Renewal Week. This was in the 70s. And we have 35 people, and they think I'm a dreamer. This is what he said to me. He said, but if I didn't affirm that we were going to have 200, we wouldn't even have those 35. So he's seeing a flow of energy in a very different way, but he's not saying 200 naively. He understands the whole thing. He's having to fight all of us. He said, if all of you worked as hard as I did, we would have 200 people there. And he means that not just physically, but with the right magnetism. But it's very tricky.
Yeah. So, well, we are at 1:00. Is there anybody else that has just been waiting to ask a question? We'll pause again here for a moment, and we'll put the grid up. We can see. This is your chance to open your cameras, if you'd like. We got some people with their cameras open.
Yeah. If you haven't waved, then open up real quick and wave.
Asha, there was this rumor that you might be traveling out to Colorado. Is that true?
Oh, I was a dive in Gangamata to live there, and I've promised them, not promised, I promised myself that I would go and visit them as friends. So, but I haven't, let's see, I was going to do it. Oh, yes, my family karma descended. That's what happened. I was going to go this last month, but my brother became ill and I've been having to finish that karma with him, help him out. So yeah, you're right. I've trained myself so much in the moment. Pranaba came to me a couple of days ago. I saw him and he said, "So I understand you're traveling soon." I said, "Really? Where?" He said, "To Texas." And I actually said, "Am I?" And then I thought, "Oh yeah, that's right." And then I am. I promised you, but it's just like, so yeah.
Make sure you remember to get on the plane.
And I promised myself that I would go visit my friends at Polestar there, with my
Okay.
family.
Well, let us know. We might jump on a plane and come up too. We've visited up there and are interested in that project too.
Sure. You
And
should be interested in that project. It looks glorious. I also wanted to see it for myself. So yeah, all those things have said. And so far I'm trying to stop. I've driven to Ananda village. I don't think I've been any farther than Ananda village. And I haven't been on a plane in 2 years. So, which is for me is very odd. But yeah, now it's all changing. So perhaps I can and shall. Good thinking, my tree.
well, we've been praying for your brother too. I hope he's been doing better.
Well,
And
his health and vitality have returned. I actually thought he might be exiting the planet, but he isn't. His health and vitality has returned, and in a week, he's still living with me, but in a week, I'm taking him back to his house. So there you have it. All those prayers worked. Thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, anybody else? We're just so grateful that you're willing to stay on with us for as long as you have, and it's just been such a blessing. I was going to, I think Mallory's left, but just everybody know it's Mallory's birthday. We'll wish her a happy birthday now.
We can own her empty shop.
Yeah. But again, thank you so much, Asha. We so appreciate you taking the time. And there's Mallory. Maybe we can close with a big Om for Mallory's birthday, and oming Asha too. Thank you so much for being with us. So, blessings to everybody, and let's end with 3 Oms, sending birthday blessings to Mallory and gratitude to Asha. Peace. Amen. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Asha. And as we say here in Texas, namaste, y'all.
Okay. It works for me. God bless you.